Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session of our two-part webinar series on resisting pension fund capitalism, series organized by Grain and hosted by A Growing Culture. My name is Devlin Kuyek. I'm a researcher with Grain. And before we get started, please note that we are providing live interpretation in French, Spanish, and English. And then you are invited to speak or write in the chat in any of these three languages. So as you can see on the screen there, to select your preferred language, please click on the globe icon on the bottom where it says interpretation, and you can select from there French, Spanish, or English. And if you are hearing other languages, multiple languages, just select mute original language from the options. Please take a moment to do so. If you have any technical issues during this session, you can reach out to the team on the chat box feature and they will address your concerns. So once again, welcome everyone. For those of you who were able to catch part one of this series, in part one, we took a big picture look at how pension funds operate globally and at the destructive consequences of their investments. Today, in part two, over the next 2 hours, we are going to explore actions and alternatives that groups are taking to try and resist pension fund capitalism. Today's session is all about sharing experiences. We're learning from each other. So we really want to hear from all of you. And we will have an open forum part of this in the second hour where we invite participation from the audience. But we're going to begin with 3 cases from Chile, Brazil, and Canada. And then from there, we're going to move to an open floor conversation. So throughout this session, we encourage you to use the chat, indicate your name, your organization, the country where you're based, and your thoughts and ideas about how to move forward with this work. My colleague at Grain in Indonesia, Kartini Samon, will be following the chat, and she'll be periodically summarizing for us what's being said there. And to kick things off, I'd like to invite Kartini to provide us just with a brief recap of the key points that emerged from the first session. So welcome, Kartini.
Thank you, Devlin. Hello, everyone. Sharing a brief recap from the first sessions we had last month, where we talk how pension funds are today is the largest pot of money that are being invested globally. They manage 56 trillion US dollar in total. This money is worker salaries that put aside for their retirement later or used to pay to current pensioners. Yet workers do not decide how the money is invested. Many of the investments that are done with it are against public interest. For example, privatizations of water and healthcare, deforestations for infrastructures, land grabbing, and others. The retirement schemes itself take many forms. It can be public, private, individuals, or collective. And some people have none. But the system itself is increasingly moving towards financializations under the control of a small number of companies, including private equity. At the same time, labor unions are not in control of pension funds. Workers have in fact become dependent on the financial returns from these investments and conditions that create those returns. Efforts to improve the systems from within has not worked. Also, outsider strategies have had some isolated success. That's why we need more awareness and broader collective actions to set a different course altogether towards something that are more collective, public, and available to all. And that is why we continue the discussions today to try and move the work forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kartini. And as you can see in the chat, you can find the notes for that recap in French, English, and Spanish, which you can click on as a PDF. So now we're going to turn to some examples of what actions people have been taking in different countries. Again, we're going to look at Chile, Brazil, and Canada. And we're going to start in Chile with Francisca Barriga, a researcher at Chile's Fundación Sol, who's going to tell us about the really interesting work that groups in Chile have been doing to try to transform their neoliberal pension system. Now, Francisca is going to be speaking in Spanish, so please be sure to select the interpretation language that you require. And she's going to take some clarification questions after her presentation, along with the other speakers. So if you have a need for clarification, please just type it into the chat or into the question and answer box, and we'll give Francisca some time after her presentation to address these. So Francisca, thank you so much for being with us, and please, the floor is yours.
Hola, Devlin. Hola a todos y todas. Primero que nada, muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Hoy día tengo el honor de poder presentar un poco la historia de resistencia ciudadana que se ha dado en Chile, un país pionero, como muchos de ustedes saben, ¿cierto?, en un sistema privatizado, absolutamente privatizado, de cuentas individuales en su sistema de pensiones. Voy a compartir pantalla. Si me pueden corroborar, ¿se está viendo la presentación de PowerPoint? No sé si alguien me puede... Ya, perfecto. Muchas gracias. Bueno, tengo 15 minutos para hacer esta pequeña presentación. Después podemos quedarnos conversando, ¿cierto? Pero primero no quiero saltarme que una breve contextualización histórica del sistema de pensiones chileno, un poco los resultados del sistema de AFP. También, dado la contextualización del seminario, ¿cierto? Nos interesa mucho como Fundación Sol poder exponer cómo las inversiones de la AFP se han dado en sectores extractivistas de la economía, y finalmente una historia de resistencia ciudadana. Quiero decir también que hoy día me acompaña Ana Muga. Ella es una dirigente de la coordinadora No Más AFP de trabajadores y trabajadoras, que posteriormente también nos va a contar un poco de su historia, ¿cierto? Y cómo había un trabajo conjunto desde la ciudadanía. Primero, nos parece muy importante relevar, para quienes no sepan, que los orígenes del sistema de AFP, siendo Chile el primero en el mundo en instaurarlo, se impone en plena dictadura militar, ¿cierto?, en la dictadura de Augusto Pinochet, en el que se cambia lo que existía antes de un sistema de seguridad social, que tenía, por cierto, que ser reformado, pero esto cambia absolutamente y se impone un mercado de cuentas individuales, ¿cierto? Aquí tengo dos imágenes, por una parte la foto del dictador, ¿cierto? Esto particularmente en 1981, y por otro cómo la prensa también apoyaba esta imposición, de alguna manera ayudando a que existiera una aceptación cultural, finalmente, porque acá se impone una batalla cultural. Y dice, pensiones tendrán reajuste automático, y si ven abajo a la izquierda, sale fin del drama de jubilados. acá es importante decir que el ideólogo de este sistema es José Piñera, justamente el hermano del expresidente Sebastián Piñera. Y él prometía una tasa de reemplazo de un 70%. Es decir, que las personas que que estuvieran en el fondo cotizando toda su vida en un sistema de cuentas individual, un sistema de AFP, iba a recibir aproximadamente el 70% de lo que recibía en el sueldo en el mercado laboral. Y acá un poco puse recortes de actas secretas de la Junta Militar, en el que acá se decía que en el fondo, no lo voy a leer en detalle, pero está en acta, que el general Pinochet dice, vamos a tener que ver que, en el fondo, cómo comunicar esto a la ciudadanía, porque se tiene que comunicar de manera tal que no se sepa que somos una excepción a la regla. ¿Y por qué? Porque justamente se impone un sistema de pensiones de AFP de cuentas individuales para el total de la ciudadanía, excepto para las fuerzas armadas y de orden, es decir, la policía, los militares, policía de investigación. Entonces, ¿qué ocurre? Justamente, esto según una de las investigaciones que hemos hecho como Fundación Sol, que se llama Pensiones por la Fuerza, vemos que tenemos una desigualdad muy importante en que existe un sistema AFP para toda la población y se mantiene un sistema de seguridad social para las Fuerzas Armadas y del orden. Y en esta investigación nosotras pudimos observar que la pensión de vejez es entre 3,9 en el caso de la policía y 3,5 veces mayor en promedio que lo que paga el sistema AFP. Es decir, pobreza para la mayoría y justamente riqueza para los que idearon este sistema. Entonces, rápidamente, el sistema es desastroso. Ya tenemos una primera generación que ha cotizado íntegramente bajo la lógica de las cuentas individuales, y vemos que la mitad del millón de jubiladas y jubilados autofinanciaron una pensión, es decir, sin ayudas del Estado. ¿Cuál es el resultado del sistema? Autofinancian una pensión menor a $207. Y incluso aquellos que cotizaron la mayor parte de su vida, entre 30 y 35 años, la mitad solamente logra autofinanciar una pensión de $332. Como sé que estamos en una audiencia internacional, no todos conocen la realidad de Chile, quizás pueden decir, ok, $300 quizás no es tan poco para un país como Chile. La verdad es que Chile tiene un nivel de costo de vida muy alto que se asimila a muchas veces países europeos, pero la realidad salarial se asimila a países que tienen un PIB per cápita mucho menor. Entonces, solamente para que ustedes se hagan una idea de para qué alcanza un salario mínimo, en Chile el salario mínimo alcanza para 1 kilo de pan al día, ir y volver al trabajo, un arriendo de una habitación muy pequeña, y el pago de las leyes sociales, es decir, cotizaciones para los sistemas de salud y sistemas de pensiones. Entonces, estamos hablando que la mitad de las personas que cotizaron la mayor parte de su vida ni siquiera alcanzan este monto como pensión. Entonces, por cierto que los resultados son desastrosos. Y, por otro lado, y nos parece y celebramos mucho la instancia de este seminario, porque nos logra dar una perspectiva más integral de cuáles son las verdaderas consecuencias que tiene para la mayoría de la población un tipo de sistema de capitalización, en este caso individual, pero también un tipo de sistema que inyecta dineros, grandes montos de dinero, a justamente una forma de desarrollo, entre comillas, que enriquece a unos pocos y empobrece a la mayoría. En este caso, ¿por qué? Porque vemos que, al menos en Chile, la mayoría de las inversiones de los fondos de pensiones están alojadas en empresas extractivistas y de alto impacto ambiental. Esto también es un estudio que hicimos desde Fundación Sol, en el que nos parece muy relevante de alguna manera decir que desde la academia, en su gran mayoría, no se han tocado en profundidad de estos temas. El sistema AFP hasta hace muy poco era un sistema intocable, porque se tenía de alguna manera, como les comentaba antes, había una batalla cultural que había sido ganada, en el que la gente en su imaginario no tocaba, ¿cierto?, el sistema AFP, y desde la generación de conocimiento aún ha sido muy pobre, si se quiere, la generación de conocimiento en profundidad de las verdaderas consecuencias y las verdaderas razones de por qué se instaló un sistema de AFP. Desde Fundación solo hemos tratado de disminuir esa brecha de conocimiento y hemos hecho distintos informes, ¿cierto? Uno de ellos es este. Y solamente para, no voy a entrar tanto en detalle, pero aproximadamente un 80% del PIB es lo que representan los fondos de pensiones hoy día en Chile. Y a junio del 2020, esto lo vamos a actualizar, pero el último dato que tenemos, ¿cierto? Junio del 2020, la AFP invertían más de 15.777 millones de dólares en empresas nacionales. El resto está afuera, más de la mitad. Pero de lo que se invierte acá dentro del país, ¿cierto?, la mayor parte está en actividades extractivistas como el sector eléctrico, el sector forestal, hidrocarburos, ¿cierto?, la refinería del petróleo en ese caso, la minería, que es una actividad muy importante para Chile, los servicios de agua potable y saneamiento. Ahí tenemos algunas similitudes con, por ejemplo, los fondos de pensiones de los profesores de Canadá, ¿cierto? Y monocultivos. En su conjunto, las actividades extractivistas, como sale ahí, abarcan un 75,5% de las inversiones de las AFP en empresas que operan en Chile. Es decir, también tenemos un impacto integral desde esta perspectiva. Entonces, frente a ante todo este panorama muy complejo, lo que se alza es la resistencia ciudadana. Esto, de alguna manera, nace hace mucho tiempo ya, marchas de no más AFP desde hace una década más o menos están andando. Y como algunos de ustedes saben, a fines del 2019 se levantó una revuelta social en el que salieron millones, literalmente, de personas a marchar en las calles, como sale en la parte izquierda de mi pantalla. Y dentro de las cuales una de las principales banderas fue no más AFP. Y esto, de alguna manera, también decanta, como sale acá, en una coordinadora. Entonces, y Ana Muga, como les comento, me va a acompañar y va a poder conversar con nosotros en un rato más. Pero frente a un sistema que no da respuesta a las personas, como sale ahí, surgen movimientos de trabajadores y trabajadoras, ciudadanos y ciudadanas, que exigen alternativas que garanticen seguridad social a las personas pensionadas. Y estos movimientos decantan en parte en la Coordinadora Nacional de Trabajadores y Trabajadoras No Más FP, que se conforma, como ahí sale, el 2013, es decir, casi una década. Y principalmente estaba conformado por sindicatos. Después empiezan a incluirse otro tipo de organizaciones. La primera marcha, con un número interesante, fue el 5 de octubre del 2003 y su recorrido, como sale ahí, fue por el Parque Forestal. No sé si algunos de ustedes lo conocen. Llegaron alrededor de 5.000 personas. Después hace un primer Congreso Nacional. Y lo importante acá es que, por ejemplo, este Congreso Nacional de la Coordinadora se hace en Valdivia. Para quienes no saben, Chile es un país profundamente centralizado en que la mayoría de las cosas ocurren en Santiago. Entonces acá también se hace un punto político de hacer el primer congreso en Valdivia, en una ciudad al sur de Chile, buscando también de alguna manera hacer un punto de descentralización, en el que en ese momento llegaron alrededor de 250 dirigentes sindicales del sector público-privado, y se cuenta con apoyo, esto es muy importante, de alguna manera, de coordinadoras como de la coordinadora de la Central Unitaria de Trabajadores, de Valdivia, y también de Federación de Estudiantes. Entonces acá ya se empieza a conformar un movimiento social, ¿cierto?, que va más allá de lo sindical, por cierto que lo sindical es muy, muy importante, pero también, por ejemplo, entra todo el área de estudiantes a poder contribuir entendiendo que es un problema no solamente de los adultos y adultas mayores del país, sino que tiene una repercusión en conjunto. Entre ese año y el 2016 realizaron marchas, protestas, jornadas de difusión a lo largo y ancho del país. Y el 21 de agosto de ese año existe la segunda gran marcha nacional, en que en Santiago marcharon ya 750.000 personas, y en todo el país se activaron marchas, incluyendo pueblos pequeños, que también es una gran cosa al entender la característica centralizada que tiene el país. Existe un segundo Congreso Nacional en la Facultad de Medicina de la Universidad de Chile, y lo que nos interesa acá es de alguna manera poder expresar que han existido diversas estrategias para poder hacer frente a este sistema, que tiene una defensa corporativa desde los medios de comunicación, desde los grandes poderes económicos y políticos. Por lo tanto, desde la ciudadanía se ha tenido que usar la imaginación, ¿cierto?, para poder hacer frente con diversas estrategias. Una es la convocatoria y coordinación de manifestaciones, cartas abiertas a presidentes, ¿cierto?, a Michelle Bachelet, a Sebastián Piñera, hoy día a Gabriel Boric, exposiciones en mesas técnicas del Congreso Nacional y de diversos ministerios, campañas de difusión. Y algo que quizás podemos hablar, porque ya se me va acabando el tiempo, pero que podemos hablar en la segunda parte, es también lo interesante que ha sido que desde la coordinadora y en una alianza estratégica con Fundación Sol, que tengo la suerte de representar, ¿cierto?, se ha elaborado una propuesta para un sistema de pensiones alternativo, basado en los pilares de la seguridad social. Esto es algo inédito en el país. Se propone un sistema de reparto moderno con reservas técnicas, se habla de beneficios definidos, por lo tanto, entrega beneficios acorde a la realidad del mundo del trabajo remunerado. Por otro lado, hace un esfuerzo de reconocer el valor del trabajo no remunerado doméstico de cuidados, y es muy importante relevar que es la única propuesta a nivel nacional para un sistema alternativo que está respaldada por un modelo actuarial que permite proyectar ingresos y gastos de este sistema al menos hasta el final del siglo. Por lo tanto, acá, por ejemplo, durante distintos gobiernos se han levantado comisiones de expertos y expertas y nunca se han evaluado propuestas de sistemas mixtos o sistemas de repartos públicos, por ejemplo, cómo esto tendría ingresos y gastos, ¿cierto? Si es sostenible financieramente, si es sostenible socialmente. Entonces, de alguna manera, en esta alianza estratégica entre generación de conocimiento y movilización social, se ha podido llegar a una de las propuestas que nos parecen muy relevantes y una de las más completas, si se quiere, respecto a algo alternativo, que nos dé una respuesta, y que se basa en el modelo de la OIT. Solamente quiero terminar diciendo que la propuesta del sistema político, esto de diversos colores políticos, si se quiere, dentro de la política partidista, tienden a mantener las cuentas individuales obligatorias como un componente primordial dentro del sistema de pensiones, y aquellos que hablan de un componente solidario lo hacen de manera complementaria y pequeña. Por lo tanto, como sale acá el edificio, se cae. Y es importante decir que desde el gobierno de Sebastián Piñera, ¿cierto?, desde voces de la centroizquierda, incluso el gobierno actual de Gabriel Boric no ha sido claro en la propuesta que va a presentar para poder hacer una reforma al sistema de pensiones. Entonces, de alguna manera, también es importante ver cómo eso va conversando con el movimiento social. Eso en una primera instancia. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Francisca, for that very inspiring and interesting presentation from Chile. So much to learn from there. We do have a question of clarification I see from Tom Abeles, who'd like to know if the current government fund is a guaranteed benefit. If there is if Chileans who are contributing to the AFP have an option for other private funds, and who manages the public plan. I think this is in relation to the AFP and not the proposed alternative. Maybe if you just want to take a couple seconds to clarify on that, Francisca, if that's clear.
Sí, la pregunta entonces es quiénes administran hoy día y si hay opciones de elegir entre un sistema y otro en Chile. ¿Esa es la pregunta?
Sí.
Perfecto. Bueno, hoy día no existe un sistema mixto en Chile, ni siquiera. Solamente un sistema privado de cuentas individuales, en la que todo trabajador y trabajadora está obligado a cotizar. Por lo tanto, de alguna manera las personas, o sea, las instituciones que administran los fondos son las AFP, justamente administradoras de fondos de pensiones, que son instituciones de derecho privado con fines de lucro, que tienen un nivel de ganancia desorbitante respecto a cualquier otro tipo de mercado hoy día en Chile. Un mercado absolutamente oligopólico, que son muy pocas AFP. En un momento se hablaba de que iba a haber una gran cantidad de competencia dentro del mercado y que la gente iba a poder elegir dentro de quien te ofreciese un mejor trato de alguna forma. Y eso hemos visto que también ha sido una falacia del sistema, porque son muy poquitas las AFP que quedan hoy día, y en general todas tienen el mismo rendimiento, las comisiones son muy parecidas también. Entonces, insisto, solamente existe un pilar de cuentas individuales, no hay un pilar verdaderamente de seguridad social, y tiene un complemento simplemente desde subsidios directos desde el Estado, pero no un sistema público de pensiones. No sé si ahí respondo a la pregunta.
Okay. Thanks, Francisca. And Tom, if your question wasn't answered, you can continue the conversation with Francisca in the chat. So I'd now like to turn to Maria Luisa Mendoça from Brazil's Network for Social Justice and Human Rights. And she's going to talk to us about their efforts to stop land grabbing by pension funds in Brazil. Maisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be part of this conversation. I think I have, I need to, the slides. Yeah, thank you so much. So my organization is the Network for Social Justice and Human Rights, Rede Social de Justiça e Direitos Humanos in Brazil. And we have been doing research about land grabbing and the role of foreign pension funds for about a decade right now. We can go to the next slide, please. We started to identify this process of financial speculation with farmland after the 2008 global economic crisis and the collapse of the housing market in the US. So after that, pension funds, especially pension funds and endowment funds from the US, started to migrate to target farmland around the world. And Brazil was one of the main targets. I don't even like to use the word investment because investment has a positive connotation. And this, of course, is a very destructive process for communities on the ground, but also for clients of these pension funds, because when you have a retirement fund, you want to have security in the future. But currently, the system is based on financial markets that are totally unstable. So this represents a risk for clients as well. And the way we found out about this process was because we were looking into the impacts of expanding monocropping of sugarcane in Brazil for the production of ethanol. And at that time, especially after 2010, there was a huge crisis in the ethanol market, and oil companies started to partner with sugarcane corporations in Brazil to dominate the ethanol market. So one large merger was between Cosan, which is the largest producer of sugarcane in Brazil, and the oil company Shell, the Dutch oil company Shell. And when we were looking into that process, we found out that Cosan had created a new type of subsidiary. It was a new type of company in Brazil, a rural real estate company called Radar. And then we found out that the main source of funding for Radar was TAA, which is a large pension fund based in the US, but also receives funds from pension funds from Europe and in Canada. Also, Harvard University and its endowment fund was a main player in that process of speculating with farmland. So even before we started to do research on the ground and to work with impacted communities, we knew two things from this process. We knew that when a large corporation such as TAA sets up a global fund to buy farmland around the world, and Brazil is one of the main targets, but it is happening in other parts of the world as well, that already puts communities, rural communities and small farmers at risk, because there is this process of large corporations wanting to gain control over farmland. And although the main goal of these corporations is to control farmland, in order to justify that, they promote the expansion of monocropping plantations. In the case of Brazil, it's mainly soy and sugarcane. And although these corporations publish sustainability reports and they have a discourse about sustainability, we know that a large monocropping plantation cannot be sustainable. It has a huge impact on the environment. So when we hear about huge fires in Brazil, environmental destruction, agribusiness, and the expansion of this monocropping system is a main cause of that. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the main area where this is happening, the main target for this process is the Brazilian Cerrado, which is the largest and the most biodiverse savanna in the world. And in order to justify that process, the corporations, the agribusiness corporations, the financial corporations, and the Brazilian government, they use a neocolonial discourse as if Brazil had this huge amount of just empty land, which of course is not true. So you can only expand monocropping plantations by destroying preserved areas or by displacing rural communities. So there are thousands and thousands of communities living in these areas, indigenous, quilombola, which are the rural Afro-Brazilian communities, and peasant communities that started to organize, because in the Cerrado, we have the plateaus that you see now, a preserved plateau, which used to be areas that communities use collectively, just to collect fruit, to raise small animals. So they preserved the environment, and then the communities live in the lowlands to practice traditional ecological agriculture. So it used to be all public land, and the only way for these lands to be put in the market would be through a public auction, which never happened. So that's why we know that the TAA and other corporations operate together with local land grabbers. Land grabbing is a very common process in Brazil. So these local operators mainly fake land titles and then put the land in the market. So, and of course, in addition to displacement, there is a huge environmental impact on local communities because the monocropping plantations depend on large amounts of chemical inputs that pollute the water, the soil, and local food production. And so we are not only talking about communities far away from Brazil, in Brazil, it's not an impact on those communities. We are talking about an impact to the whole hemisphere. The Cerrado is a main source of underground water because its trees have very large roots that go on and on and on for many kilometers. So it's an important source of underground water and where most of the river springs are in Brazil. So the destruction of the Cerrado has a huge impact on rain cycles in the whole hemisphere and a huge impact on climate change. So next slide, please. So when after identifying this process, we started to organize nationally and internationally, and also working together with rural communities. And the Pastoral Land Commission, Comissão Pastoral da Terra, CPT, is a main partner in that process. Isolete from CPT is here. She's going to speak at the end of the in the open forum, and she's also one of the coordinators for the campaign, the national campaign in defense of the Cerrado in Brazil, which is an important coalition. And well, the main strategies are working together to support communities to organize using legal strategies and advocacy strategies to advance their collective land rights. Through our process of research and legal work, a local judge has canceled several titles because of this evidence of fraud. And now the communities are organizing to claim collective land rights, because although they don't have land titles, they have the right to land because they have been living in the land for several generations. So we are supporting these communities to connect with each other, communities that used to be isolated, and now they are building collective spaces to organize and to demand land rights. And it's a combination of international solidarity, which is a very important point, because by doing action alerts, international advocacy, we also are able to increase protection of these communities that constantly face violence, death threats, and destruction of their food production and local environment. So we are also organizing clients of TAA, and in the case of the Harvard Endowment Fund, students and faculty at Harvard University, to demand that these corporations stop speculating with farmland. Farmland, it's an important social natural resource for humanity. So large corporations should not be speculating with farmland. So individual clients of these corporations and also institutional clients are demanding that they stop buying farmland, they stop speculating with farmland, and they give the land back to the communities and pay reparations for damages. So we are, for example, working with organizations in Canada, in Europe, and we can go to the next slide, to make sure that institutional clients of GAA, such as pension funds from other countries, stop sending money to GAA, stop using their clients' funding in this destructive way. And we are also working with universities, passing, for example, faculty resolutions, organizing on campuses in the US, so universities can also pressure TAA to stop speculating with farmland, in addition to organizing individual clients. So these are some of the organizations that are part of this campaign. We have a collective website, and so it's important to notice, just to end, that we have tried to engage with TAA in shareholders meetings, in meetings with TAA staff, and also with the Harvard University Endowment Fund, but they usually keep repeating the same talking points. They don't even recognize that there is any problem, which is very clear that this is a destructive process, that it's a very urgent issue, because if we don't change our food systems, if we don't stop the expansion of agribusiness, we will not be able to deal with the climate crisis, and we're not going to be able to deal with, for example, the destruction of biodiversity, which is also connected with the current health crisis, the global health crisis that we live in. So the main strategy is, instead of trying to engage with these corporations, is to denounce the destructive process and to raise public awareness. So, and to build solidarity. So that's a main strategy. And thank you again for having me in this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Maisa. We have a couple questions from the audience, and maybe you can address quickly. Helena Paul, nice to have you with us, Helena. She asks for a little bit more clarity about what you mean by fake land titles and how these are set up in Brazil and put on the land market. So maybe you could just explain a little bit of the process of grilagem. That would be helpful.
Yeah, this is a very common process that has been happening historically in Brazil. Basically, local operators, local landowners, they partner with notary offices, and they literally create fake titles for public lands in Brazil. And it's called grilagem in Portuguese, because they fake the titles and they put them in drawers with crickets. In Brazil, grilo means crickets. And so the paper looks old, so they literally fake land titles. And then through this process of fraud, they then put the lands in the markets as if they were legal titles, and then sell the lands to large corporations.
Thanks. There's also another question from Tom Abeles, who asks, it says, pension funds are usually passive investors and not dictating to those who operate. Is it different in the case of Brazil? And maybe you could just mention about TIA and their involvement with Westchester or even Harvard and how they are involved in farmland.
Yes, they are, of course, the funding comes from TAA, right? And other pension funds that send their funding to TAA, but they hide behind a very complex set of subsidiaries. They use other corporations, so they hide behind that. Westchester is one of them, but there are also other Brazilian corporations that operate in the name of GAA, such as Radar, Mancilla, Telos. So they create several subsidiaries. In the case of these three that I mentioned, Radar, Telos, and Mancilla, which are Brazilian operators, they have the same address. So they are mainly fake companies because in Brazil, there is a law that limits foreign ownership of land. So GAA, they trade stocks amongst themselves. So it's difficult to find where the money comes from. But the main source of funding is TAA and Harvard, and both of them use the same strategy of using several subsidiaries to hide their role. But if there was not funding from TAA and Harvard, this process would not happen.
Yeah, and maybe just I could add that in the case of TIA, they even have their own farm management company. So they actually do handle some of the management of their own farms. So they're a very active investor in farmland. One more clarification question, just quickly, from Kathy Holtzlander from the National Farmers Union in Canada. She asks, when TIA speculates in farmland, are they purchasing it for low prices and then selling to others for high prices? Who are they selling the appropriated land to? What is the market for TIA land in Brazil? Or does TIA mostly get money from rent and profit from monoculture production? So just maybe if you can explain, Maisa, about how TIA, what's their profit strategy in this?
Yeah, they do both. In some cases, they partner with agribusiness corporations. In some cases, they just fence the area and wait for the price of land to increase. But the process is very much similar to the stock market. That's why they use secrecy. One of the main strategies at the beginning of the campaign was to call for transparency, because TAA didn't even review where they were buying farmland. So we had to do this very difficult investigation. Devlin was a big part of the research with us to find where these farms were. But basically, since the process is similar to the stock market, they have to buy land which is supposedly cheap, expecting that the price is going to increase. So the area they are targeting is the Mato Piba area, the states of Maranhão, Bahia, Piauí, and Tocantins, which is the so-called last agricultural frontier in Brazil. But the thing is that after some years of expanding monocropping plantation, the soil is destroyed, the water is polluted, so the land basically is useless. So we know that, for example, Harvard has had a hard time selling land because, once you destroy the land, it's much more difficult to sell. So we see this as a bubble, really, that, they make profits in the short term, but in the long term, it also represents a risk for clients of GAA, in addition to the huge environmental destruction that they cause.
Thank you, Maisa. And just also say that it's not just Brazil where these pension funds are investing in farmland, but globally. And I know TIA, for instance, is very focused on Chile presently and Eastern Europe. So I'd like to now turn to a little bit of a different sector here. We're going to bring in Kevin Skerrett from the Canadian Union of Public Employees, who you will remember from the first session. And Kevin's going to talk about actions that Canadian labor groups have taken to try and challenge their pension fund investment in a scandal-plagued long-term care company. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you very much, Devlin, and thank you everyone for being here. Let me start to just say it's an honor to follow Francisca and Maria Luisa and to share these experiences and to learn from each other about what is happening and what pension funds are doing in these countries and around the world. I think this is a really valuable discussion. I'm going to, as others have, I do have several slides to share, and I hope they will be visible. Those can be seen, yes. And perhaps what I can do is begin with, just so as Devlin says, we are moving from Latin America situations to Canada, and maybe just one observation to start with. I spoke in the first webinar in early May about, in particular, the role that Canadian pension funds have been playing, and I emphasized that most of these very large players, like the TIAA fund that Maria Luisa spoke about, they're from only 7 countries. The largest 7 countries are the source of a very large percentage of these international investments. But the point I want to make today is that it is not only predatory investing and destructive behavior overseas and outside of these countries. In this case that I'm going to talk about, which is healthcare, this is inside Canada. This is a Canadian pension fund involved in something in Canada that has become visible in just the past 2 years because of the pandemic. So let me just share some basic details of this story. Just to say, I think globally, the COVID-19 pandemic showed in Canada and in many countries that we have very serious problems in our healthcare system, and in particular, what we call in Canada the long-term care health system, which is basically healthcare that is residential for seniors, for primarily seniors with healthcare needs and disabilities, dementia, and so forth. And what we saw early in 2020, right away when the pandemic hit, is that the crisis situation and the high death rates, the mortality, and the very serious, devastatingly deadly situation was much, much worse in the for-profit long-term care companies and facilities. And in Canada, even though Canada is known for having a strong public health system, that is primarily our hospital system and our primary care with doctors and so forth. Long-term care is not part of our public system. And in fact, in recent years, it has become increasingly privatized, increasingly dominated by a number of chains, corporate chains that are operating these facilities on a for-profit basis at very high profit levels, funded though by government. This is public funds going into privately operated for-profit companies. And the second point here is that when we were taking stock of this situation in 2020, April, May, June, seeing very high death rates in some of these big for-profit companies, the second largest of the for-profit companies in Canada is called Revera, and it's a fairly visible name in Canada. And it became visible and reported in the media that this Revera company is in fact 100% owned by one of the large pension funds, what's called the Public Sector Pension Investment Board, or PSPIB, which is the pension fund, the pension investment body for workers in the federal government, federal public service workers, and certain other federally employed workers. And that board, that PSPIB, is actually a federal crown corporation established just to invest these pension monies, with no involvement of any trade unions or workers or pension plan members. This is an entirely, it's a very peculiar structure because it's publicly owned, but operated for profit. And so that became visible. And when this was in the media, moving to my second slide, this was a bit of a challenge because people started to raise questions. Well, what are the unions that represent these workers doing? How do people feel about their own pension money being used to own and operate a long-term care healthcare company that has been exposed for having understaffing problems, major, very high death rates in these homes as compared to publicly owned and managed facilities. And what that led to was one of the largest trade union in Canada representing these workers, which is called the Public Service Alliance of Canada, or PSAC. They reacted immediately or very quickly in May of 2020 and issued a statement, which is still on their website, which responds to this, condemns the fact that their pension fund owns this company, and they didn't suggest that they perform better. What's really important, they issued a declaration that said, we oppose our pension fund being involved in this kind of investment. And we're not just proposing that it be divested, that it be sold or transferred to another private owner, which they could have done. Instead, they called on the government and the pension fund management to transfer the ownership of that company, of Rivera Long-Term Care, into public hands, into the public sector, into government control, in order to end the for-profit management of the company, which was at the heart of the problems internal to their operations. And that declaration, which is in some ways unprecedented. It's very rare for trade unions to come out and publicly say, we condemn this investment and we call for essentially the nationalization of this company. I don't know of many cases where this has happened. So for my purposes, and as I said in the first webinar, I've been following this for many years. I think this is a very important turning point in Canada. It was reported in the media, and the PSAC started to organize with healthcare advocates and other allies to actually organize a campaign to call for this transformation of ownership. And that campaign came to be known as Make Rivera Public, a simple slogan which sort of captures the message. So PSAC organized town hall meetings. There was an online letter writing campaign. Many of the same techniques that Maria Luisa spoke to. This is what was happening in Canada. And I would say it made this problem, this contradiction of worker pension funds being invested in exploitative and destructive healthcare provision on a for-profit basis, made it very visible. This then led just last year in March of 2021, after several months of campaigning, this led to an even larger coalition forming. So 15 of the unions, and there's only, I believe, 17 or 18, representing workers in this pension plan, all co-signed a statement joining with the original union and agreeing, yes, we agree this should not be in our pension fund. We agree Rivera should be made public. And it may be important to say that call issued last year was very much in support of broad public opinion. Through the course of the pandemic, polls have been taken in Canada asking people, do you support these calls that are growing, partly with Rivera, but partly more broadly, to make long-term care itself part of the public healthcare system. And every time these polls have been taken, we see 65, 70, 75% of the population supports that call. So this became a very significant campaign. I have a slide here that shows it even got into the mainstream mass media. It was reported that there is this campaign. The headline here, a pension fund that owns Rivera faces pressure to divest the for-profit care home chain. I'll just underline, the call is in fact not just divestment, but transformation into public ownership. But this was a very important article. Up until this point, the campaign that a number of us and a number of trade unions were involved in had not been publicly reported. So, as I say, this has been, over the past 2 years, I think, a very important campaign that is, in effect, resisting one of the expressions, one of the forms that pension fund capitalism has been taking inside Canada itself. I have a couple of updates on the campaign and the situation, and some are positive and some are more challenging. One update is that, in fact, CUPE, the union that I work for, which doesn't represent these particular workers, or only a very small number, actually passed a resolution supporting the campaign. That was in November of 2021. I should just say, as a footnote, I'm here speaking today in my own account. I'm not formally representing CUPE. I should always build that in. So this was very positive because CUPE is in fact the largest union in Canada, represents more than 700,000 workers, and it shows that the message is spreading. And CUPE does represent some of the workers in Rivera facilities, so that's important. Second point here, another union, the Postal Workers Union in Canada, known as CUPW, and also quite respected in Canada for its history of militance and strength as a union. They have also, in just January of this year, passed a resolution declaring support for the Make Rivera Public campaign. And they did that in part, and this relates to some of the questions raised to Maria Luisa. The postal workers discovered that their pension fund, which is operated by their employer, the Canada Post Corporation, basically the post office, which is a crown corporation, their pension fund is invested in an infrastructure company called Axiom, which itself has a joint venture with Rivera. They have money invested in structures that are basically attached to Rivera and also pumping profits out of that system. And to their credit, Postal Workers Union and their retirees have been saying, we don't want a part of this either. So the campaign and the message has continued to expand even this year. Having said that, the final bullet point here points out that in some ways, I think it's fair to say that this campaign has had an impact on the reputation and the image of the company and even the pension fund itself that owns Rivera. And just in the last few months, there have been several announcements, relatively quiet announcements, that Rivera has begun to sell their long-term care homes and facilities to other companies. And in some ways, this is very bad news because some of the other companies are among the worst actors, also having a terrible record. In some ways, this may well lead to even more financialization of these facilities. So this is not the solution that the campaign has been fighting for, but it is interesting and I think important to note that it's pretty clear that Rivera as a company is wanting to exit this sector, and I think it's because of the campaign. So maybe just a final word on that, and if I have 2 minutes left, I have a postscript to add. I will just say, to sum up the Rivera case, I think this is a turning point in some ways in Canada, in the Canadian labor movement, because I would argue this is the first time that a major pension fund and a pension fund investment into some something like healthcare has been challenged in a serious way, including by the unions and the workers and the beneficiaries of these investments. Because, of course, the argument that is always made, I'm sure Maria Luisa heard this from TIAA, oh, well, we need to make profits. We need to do these things in order to deliver pensions. Workers are dependent on these pensions, so we have to do these things. And it's impressive to me that these trade unions that have been, and others, but especially the trade unions, have been willing to say, yes, we want an investment return on our pension fund, but not in any way possible, and not in this way. I think that's been made clear. And I have a final slide, just my postscript is related, but slightly different. It's related because it's in the same sector of long-term care. Some of you that have been following events in Europe and in France may know that there is a major scandal unfolding in the last 3 months in one of their, in fact, the largest for-profit long-term care company in France is under a major investigation for abusive treatment of residents and workers. A journalist did an expose showing that many hundreds of residents died during the pandemic of dehydration, malnutrition, neglect, these terrible situations. This has led to the government of France actually doing an investigation and now recommending criminal charges be laid against this company, which is called Orpea. So this is the Orpea scandal that is continuing to unfold. I believe just yesterday, the police were raiding the offices of Orpea as part of this investigation. Well, the point here is Orpea is it's actually a publicly listed company, a share company, but the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, this largest of the Canadian funds, owns 22% of the voting shares of Orpea. And they have the authority to name 2 of the directors on their board of directors. So like this is very much there. It's a minority stake. It's not like Rivera, but it's a very significant minority. It is being talked about in France very actively. What are the Canadians doing with this company? And this scandal has also led to a collapse in the value of the shares of Orpea. This company may go bankrupt because of this scandal. It's a very serious crisis, and it shows that there are serious risks attached to this kind of investment. So even that logic of, well, we need to make these profits and maybe we can look the other way with the social harms that we cause, in this case, I think that is exposed and the risks are very serious. And in some ways, maybe my final word, this is a powerful dialogue to have. In some ways, I think when we talk about resisting pension fund capitalism, I think our resistance is in part about actually showing and building, raising the level of political and social risk attached with these kinds of predatory investments. So I hope I haven't gone over time. I will stop there, but I look forward to discussing with you all what else may be done to organize against these problems.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I hope you are correct about this turning point. And both you, Francisca, and Maisa have given us a lot to consider here as we move into the next part of the session, the open floor part. So here we're going to invite everyone to share. So you can all, please, we encourage you to jump in with any thoughts, ideas, questions you may have. You can use the raise hand option at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a mobile, you might have to look for 3 dots and you'll see it there. And then we'll get to you and bring you in. If you are uncomfortable with, the session will be recorded. So if you're uncomfortable with being on video, you can just turn your camera off. And if you prefer, you can also just put your comments into the chat. And like I said, my colleague Cartini will be periodically bringing those in. You can also dialogue with those who've presented in the chat. So if you have specific questions for Kevin, say, just find him in the chat there. We are going to kick off this this open floor session with a few people who we've invited to give reactions to what they've heard. And we're going to start with Peter Rossman, who has recently retired from the IUF, the International Union of Food, Agricultural, Hotel, Restaurant, Catering, Tobacco, and Allied Workers Association. I should say that Peter helped Grain in developing this webinar series, and he has a very long experience in fighting private equity and the financialization of pension systems. So, Peter, if you have 3 minutes, it would be lovely to hear your thoughts, please.
Thanks, and thanks to all the presenters and the organizers. There's much to comment on. I would say that I think what this has done is bring together activists working on the same problem, but essentially from different directions. And I would hope that it creates a space for further strategic reflection and further organizing. I find, for example, it very interesting how Kevin highlights the transformation of the Rivera campaign, which initially began with a focus on disinvestments, quickly moved into make Rivera public, and moved from that into a broader demand to make long-term care public, because I think this is the only solution. Of course, we have to resist. All of us have to resist this financial aggression, the assault on the environment, the assault on livelihoods. The question is how to move beyond resistance and raising awareness to get a grip on the larger dimension of the problem. And I think that Rivera experience raises the question. I mean, I've been there. You can resist individual investments. You can go to shareholder meetings. You can pass resolutions. You can correspond with the Harvard Endowment. In the final analysis, it's an exhausting process, and it's an endless process. And so you have to get at the fundamental question. Care for seniors becomes open to predatory investors to the extent that it's privatized. And I think we have to think about how to protect fundamental public goods like land, like water, like healthcare, to basically ring fence them against all forms of financial predation. And that, of course, means bringing them under democratic public control. And I think that is definitely the direction that all of us working from all our various situations and points of view have to be moving towards. But of course, it's easier said than done. And I think that what this series of webinars has done is to begin to create a space to discuss how we can build that strategy and that kind of organization. So again, thanks to the organizers and the presenters.
Right on, Peter. Thank you. Very clear message there. I'd now like to ask Isolete Wiciniewski from who's the national coordinator of Brazil's Pastoral Land Commission, the CPT. She's a fierce defender of communities in Brazil's Cerrado region that Maria Luisa was sharing about. And Isolete, when you join, just be sure to select original audio. Isolete is going to be speaking in Portuguese, and then you'll be able to get the interpretation for that. So, bom dia, Isolete.
Good morning, Isolete. Good morning, Devlin, and all the other colleagues here today. It's so nice to have this space to talk together and to be accompanied by these different communities in the Cerrado, in the Amazon, and other biomes. CPT, the Pastoral Land Commission, operates in Brazil and also in different regions. And we have significant experience of, together with the communities and in their local processes, of offering the knowledge so that they can understand the process that impacts them based on these international funds. We have a public social security system, but we also have the public pensions, we have also the private pensions. So it's important to understand whether these pension funds are also making these destructive investments, as we've seen in Canada, United States, and Europe. The situation is significant here in Brazil, which is the diversity of the countryside. Aside from the diversity within the communities, we have biological diversity here as well. Our biodiversity is incredible in biomes such as the Amazon or the Cerrado, also the Atlantic Mata, and the relationship that these communities have with these territories where they live, and how that is linked to their existence. So we can see that these have repercussions on the existence of these communities in a territory. They also affect the land, the water, the forests, but also their spiritual selves. That process has affected these communities. And together with other organizations, we have tried to do national campaigns, such as that for the defense of Cerrado, and different coordination groups and different processes that we've done through the local organization of the communities, where they are recognized as communities based on their identities, whether Sertaneja or others. We have a huge variety of diverse communities and their relationship with their land. The repercussions have affected the communities because the federal and state policies have enabled those funds to have a full run to speculate in Brazil. So the federal government, whether the government itself or by reformulating the laws, has made it possible for these investments, these destructive investments, to enter Brazil. And to understand how this process has affected not just the local communities, the traditional communities, but also those that have defended the agrarian reform now with the excuse of a legal guarantee, which tends to facilitate these foreign investments. Land is being bought for monocultures of soy or others. And other discussions that we have in South America and Latin America, there's a lot said about land governance, that the communities should be the ones to govern their land. The governments use this as an excuse to legalize what already existed. So as was mentioned before, this falsification of land titles, these communities that need their land, but these false titles end up benefiting those that use toxic chemicals that contaminate the water. So this enables the expansion of this process. And as Maria Luisa mentioned, in the region of Piauí, that process of collective organization is taking place with the support of international organizations. We did a protest which managed to raise awareness of this issue. The government had to pay attention to this process, and they had to talk about the local laws so that the communities could little by little manage to make these lands theirs by law. There are other spaces where the communities have lost their lands. Maria Luisa mentioned the communities where agribusiness has had an impact, has occupied the areas that have underground water. And we're also seeing large monocultures that displace the communities. These communities are arranged in, well, now we also have an ongoing tribunal of the communities of the Cerrado to systematize the situation of these communities while guiding the communities and the international organizations in order to strengthen the process that the communities are carrying out with the international organizations supporting them. And this experience has been very important. And we would like to thank you for this space to share.
Thank you. I'd like to now turn to Jammu Anand, who is the president of the Nagpur Municipal Corporation Employees Union in Maharashtra, India. Jammu is a well-known union leader who has fought water privatization in India for a long time. Jammu, you have 3 minutes, please, to share your thoughts. It's lovely to hear from you.
Very much for including me in this meeting. Yeah, in India also, we are observing and witnessing the government is more focused on this pension fund and the reforms which were carried since 2003, where national pension system was evolved and which was brought under pension fund regulatory and development authority, and then the whole in India it was basically defined benefit system which is considered as a social security welfare scheme, but later it was changed by contributory scheme. But of late, in 2014, this pension fund regulatory development authority has been transformed into an act. It's a central act now, which has 6 board members appointed by the union government, headed by the finance minister, and in which the representatives of the provincial governments and the private sector will be nominated. In a sense, out of 6, the majority will be from the private sector. After 2014, for the first time, this pension fund was brought in the market, particularly in the stock and bonds. But of late 20s, the government has brought new avenues for investment, which is very dangerous in a sense: private equity, real estate, infrastructure, and securities like gold. So, yeah, as on date, the investment of pension fund was not made largely, but looking at the overall direction of the government, in which the India urban India, which is being portrayed as the investment destiny, where the large infrastructures will come up. The real estate is seen as another sector in India as a growth sector. So in days to come, if this pension fund is diverted in these sectors. So as we all know, the Indian economy is not going through in a good situation. So the private capital, to sustain private capital, if the workers' hard-earned money is pumped in, diverted to stimulate the capitalist economic system and private capital. So largely the central trade unions in India have expressed their resistance, their concern, and they're more concerned about what will happen to this hard-earned workers' money. So in days to come, we will have to see how the government of India, through this pension fund regulatory and development authority, will try to invest this pension fund, and how that pension fund will be made more volatile, and because the government has now decided that this social security will take care by the market, not by the government. So as trade unions, we are closely observing the government's desire to invest this money to rescue the private capital which is in crisis.
Thank you so much, Jamu. It's great to have your insight there from India. And it seems like there's a lot to learn from the Chilean experience that might be worth looking at for the struggles you have there. And we're going to turn now to the audience. So there are some people who've raised their hands. Please, others, if you have comments or interventions you'd like to make, just put your hand up. We'll get to you. Speaking of Chile, we're gonna start with Ana Muga, who is here, who's a part of the movement there. So I'd like to invite Ana to speak. Remember, please keep your interventions short. We want to make sure there's room for everyone. Thank you.
Hola, buenos días. No sé si.
Hi, good morning. I'm not sure if it's good morning over there, but it is here. So hi to everyone, and it's been a real pleasure to hear all of these different experiences. As Francisca mentioned in her presentation, the coordination of No More AFP arose to fight against the absolute power that AFP and the private associations have on these funds in Chile. And listening to the different presentations, we can see that the power that these companies have, that they achieve with the workers in our country and also in other countries, how this huge pot of money that they have access to in the whole world. In Chile, they have absolute control. They have all of the obligatory contributions made by the workers in the country, and using that, they have this economic policy has been generated that controls everything: the media, the political sectors, the political parties. So our organization has had all of these years of facing this huge task to develop a strategy to tackle and try to make a change in a solidarity, to make a solidarity-based system. At the moment, we are going through the process of the constitution, and as Francisca also mentioned, our demands form part of that. For many years now, we've been working on trying to implement our demands, and it's been 41 years since the system was imposed. And during that time, there was this kind of cultural narrative which was necessary to keep this system going. This individualism was installed from the beginning to to favor the acceptance of these individual accounts, the fact that you are the owner of your accounts and you decide what you want to do with that. That's the narrative that exists among the population, and we're always fighting against this publicity campaign, which was constantly bombarding everyone in all of the media. And we're trying to convey our message so that the workers know that we need to change the system, because they want to protect their rights, but their rights will be expropriated if they think that by moving into a public system, we're going to be their money is going to be taken away from them. So we're fighting against that idea, which isn't true. They think that they have to protect their small savings for their retirement. And within the constitution process, we've also found many objections, because this narrative has really had a huge impact. This understanding is too strong, and it has meant that a lot of politicians, people who were elected even to generate this, even to produce this new constitution, they themselves even have their doubts. They don't know what a social security system is, this social distribution would be. They've come from a generation that hasn't had that before. They have no connection to living in a solidarity-based community. So it's important to see how where countries that do have a social system are working well with this system, because it's really a difficult task for us to try to demonstrate that it can work. And it seems that even now we might not be able to manage the implementation of the social system, because these companies have so much power on all levels. What is being proposed at the moment in terms of a change in the system is a system where the business of the AFP is maintained, and the second contribution from the employers, which doesn't exist at the moment with AFP, only the workers contribute. They're working on an employers association, and that would go sort of towards solidarity, but they don't say how. This would end up being in the hands of the AFP, and they would end up, as was mentioned earlier, being invested in extractivist companies. People don't know when they're going to retire at the moment, and that's the conflict, this issue that we're facing at the moment. And it's interesting to link that up with the experiences that you're all mentioning. Thank you, Anna.
For sharing. We're going to turn back north up to Canada. Kathy Holtzlander from the National Farmers Union is there. Kathy, please, you have 3 minutes. Invite Kathy in, please. There we are.
There.
Hi, Kathy.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, and I'll turn my, I guess you don't need to see me. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear about the Chilean system. And I remember reading a bit about how that kind of was brought into being when I read Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, and Chile was kind of used by the right-wing ideologues in the United States to impose some of their ideas, social engineering kind of ideas and market-based solutions, and their quote-unquote solutions for them. And that individualized social programs was part of it. And this makes me think about in Canada, we have RRSPs. These are registered retirement savings plans that are encouraged by the tax system. People can basically defer income and, get a tax break if they invest money into these certain funds. And these, I think, are part of the whole picture of pension fund capitalism and land grabbing. I know from studying some of the farmland investment companies that are operating in Canada that many of them are, probably most of them are, approved RRSP funds, so that they're getting money at a discount, really, from the investors. They're at an advantage because of that to purchase land, and this promotes concentration of farmland and a shift towards tenant farming in Saskatchewan, and concentration of land ownership. And of course, these RSPs are also involved in venture capital funds like oil and gas exploration and various other kinds of higher risk enterprises in a way. So we're also seeing our sort of private accounts. It's not as enforced as the Chilean system, but it is we've got a bit of a hybrid system here between a public pension, the company pensions, and these RSP funds. And I guess I'm just wondering if this is something that the sort of pension fund critique is looking at this sort of dynamic as well. And another point is in Saskatchewan, my province, which is the largest agricultural province in Canada, it's got the most farmland, in 2016 banned pension funds from owning farmland. And this was after the Canada Pension Fund bought 115,000 acres, and they were forced to divest of it. But this pension fund restriction does not affect these farmland investment companies that are RSP eligible. So there's a little bit of a gap and a contradiction there. So anyways, just put that out there. Thanks. And what a great series. Thanks so much for putting it on, and I'm learning so much.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, maybe I could call him, I'm not sure if Francisca or Kevin, maybe you want to address this question about the more sort of privatized pension plans and where they fit into this.
Should I start? I was going to leave it to Francisca. I will maybe because the last question, what Kathy was raising was a Canadian perspective. I'll just say very briefly, fully agree with the observations Kathy made about what we call in Canada the RRSP system. This is very much like 401ks in the United States, and in fact, very similar in many ways to the AFP, the AFP system in Chile. Just to say, as Kathy pointed out, the difference is that in Chile, it is mandatory, and it's really the only system. This was imposed on Chile, and people don't really have much of a choice. There's a sort of a fake choice you can choose within the oligopoly of which AFP company you can use, but it's really limited. In the Canadian system, the individualized scheme is entirely voluntary. It's tax assisted, as Kathy says, so you get a tax break. But in fact, it's a real minority of the population that participates. I think the last measure I saw was maybe 25% of the population on an annual basis is making voluntary contributions. It's an individual account system. All of the risk is on the individual. Of course, some people are desperate. They don't have an alternative, so they use this system, but it's profoundly inadequate, insecure, and it's not providing real retirement security for people. And to add the workplace pensions and the Rivera case and many of the famous Canadian pension funds are rooted in workplace-based systems. And even those only reflect, depending on how you measure it, maybe 25% of the working population, maybe 30%. It's a minority. So really, most Canadians have no workplace-based pension. They only have a very modest public system. So in fact, even in Canada, we have a lot to learn from our comrades in Chile and in the social struggles in other countries to actually rebuild and build a proper, more secure and sort of comprehensive solidarity-based pension system. And of course, my argument is that if we're going to do that, we should learn these lessons about predatory financialization and really resting on financial assets should not be at the center of the system. I think that's the lesson we learned from Chile. I would say that's the lesson we learned from Canada, and in fact, most of the experiences that have been reviewed.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, just to add maybe on the predatory aspect with the private pension plans, there's also moves to make them be able to access private equity. So private equity is a major area of investment of the more sort of public pension funds. And there are moves to make it accessible for the private pension plans as well. We have another hand raised by Ewan Gibb, but before we go to Ewan, I want to ask Cartini, who's been following the chat, to jump in and give us a little summary of what's been happening there.
Thanks, Steph. Yes, there's a lot going on in the comments. So one participants have been shared earlier that it seems like the issue is the developers, like the agribusiness companies in Brazil, not the pension funds being the problem. And another person wonders if public pension system do as much harm as private funds. This is sort of like the examples of Orbea that Kevin mentioned. Maybe anyone wants to respond on that. And also a journalist who have been investigating these issues in relations to food and climate have offered to be contacted if group has have issues to report. They have generally shared their contact informations in the chat that we will include in the post-webinar email. Thank you.
Thanks, Cartini. Okay, so the panelists, please look to the chat too, and I'm sure there's some questions and comments that you may respond to. I would like to turn now to Ewan Gibb. Ewan, we remember you from the last session. You'd shared a really lovely article that you'd written about the situation in Brazil for Jacobin magazine. So Ewan, please keep your comments to three minutes if you can.
Sure thing. I'm just looking if I can. Is it allowed to open our cameras? I don't see the possibility to do so. Perhaps that's with the host. Nope, it doesn't appear as an option.
Okay, sorry about that.
Should I continue or do you want to try?
I would say just go ahead and we'll see what we can do on the camera.
Okay, no problem. Welcome, everybody. Thanks a lot to the organizers for sure, and to the excellent panelists. My name is Ewan Gibb. I work as the regional assistant here for the Global Union Public Services International, which is a global union, 700 trade unions, about 30 million workers at the base from 154 different countries. We've got an Inter-Americas office here in Sao Paulo, which is where I live. Where we get from Canada, top of Canada to the bottom of Chile. That's our Inter-Americas region. A lot of our work here out of this office is to build, and globally, is to build bridges and connections between different actors in the region and beyond, including our affiliates. One of the examples that I want to highlight is the example of Rio's public water system, which was recently privatized. Kevin brought this up in the first encounter. And talked a little bit about the work between Brazilian affiliates and Canadian affiliates, principally CUPE, on trying to pressure
Ewan, we lost you.
There we go.
Okay.
To not invest in Canada's, not invest CPPIB money, Canadian working class money, from the public pension system in Rio's water system. Of course, they're sold as green, sustainable investments in Canada and beyond, similar to what the teachers do in the case of Chile, right? It's the exact same kind of logic. I just want to highlight also Eletrobras, the massive public energy company here in Brazil, is currently being privatized by the Bolsonaro government. And it's exactly the same situation that we find ourselves in. The scale, of course, is much greater. There's a period of financial expression of interest that's from the 6th to the 9th. So that ends today. And the shares of this public energy system, massive energy public company in Brazil, is being launched tomorrow on the New York Stock Exchange. And so what I'm bringing here is kind of an unresolved, perhaps unresolvable strategic question. Both Kevin and Peter today have talked about the need for public democratic control of these companies. Well, both the public system of water in the case of Rio de Janeiro and in the case of Eletrobras, they were under public democratic control. I mean, so our campaign goal here in the kind of short term, and perhaps this is contradictory, this is why it's an unresolved kind of strategic question, is for CPPIB not to invest. I mean, but the reality is Rio's system was privatized. It was broken up. The profitable pieces sold off, including to the Canadian pension plan system. And Eletrobras is going to be launched tomorrow. And so the reality is it's happening, and it has happened. One thing that an update that I can share with you guys is that this morning, there's a strike being organized of some of those water workers in the state of Rio de Janeiro. 300 of them are going on strike because of slave-like working conditions and their lodgings. It's a terrible situation, right? And in this block of the water system, it's actually Singapore's sovereign wealth fund that bought this block of Rio's public water system. So we're involved in a campaign where we say we don't want CPPIB to invest. Well, if they don't invest, Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund invests, and that's even less accessible than perhaps the CPPIB is. And so that puts us into an even worse situation. And so I don't know if there's a way to resolve this. I mean, our campaigns to democratize the companies or preserve public companies that already have that are public and have some kind of democratic control, yes. But the complement to that is democratizing the pension system in the rich countries, which is where the cash is coming from. And so it's kind of a question to the Canadian and other comrades, like, is that part of the organizing work in Canada? Yes, we want to democratize and preserve public companies here where we're working in the global south. But is that part, the fight to democratize and open up control of the fund where they focus exclusively on the necessity of maximizing profits and sell it as green sustainable capitalism, right? When they're operationalizing their fiduciary duties, sure. But is that part of the organizing work in Canada as well? Because for me, these are two kind of necessary complements that gets us perhaps towards a resolution of this unresolved strategic question. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Ewan. Fantastic comment, and yeah, that really highlights, I think, one of the objectives with this series is to get us into these kinds of conversations. And as this is some grain and a growing culture are very committed to follow up from this. We really want to encourage groups to get in touch and look at how we can perhaps have a next session where we're going to get more deep into strategy. So that, that's something that we want to take forward. But we just have a few minutes left, and maybe I'll pass that back to Kevin, because there were some or Kevin or Peter too, if you want to jump in. I think those questions are directed mostly to you.
Yes, let me just start. I can very quickly give a response to Ewan's important question. I think the short answer is yes. I think the trade unions that are trying to engage on this want to bring that kind of issue of more democratic accountability of these pension bodies to the workers whose pension fund money it is. However, an important caveat which speaks to this strategy question. I made this point in the last webinar, I'll make it again. In the past 30 years, there has been an assumption, a widely held view, that simply negotiating, worker seats or union seats on boards will be enough to do that democratization and to restrain the investment side of these pension plans in ways that respect workers' rights and social and environmental concerns. And I think the story that we're telling, that I've been telling, is that this has not worked. Even like some of the most aggressive entities, like the Ontario Teachers Plan involved in water in Chile and a number of others, they're jointly governed by representatives of trade unions. So I think I'm just saying we need a reckoning with, okay, that joint governance is not enough. What is needed? And I would say we need to talk about issues like Kathy mentioned, the restriction on financialization of farmland, a legal rule that says you can't do this. We need legal rules that say you can't own, operate, manage for profit, and financialize healthcare, water, energy in Brazil. CPPIB is lined up first to be a buyer of these new shares of Eletrobras in Brazil. We need to make this not possible. This is a legacy of neoliberalism and globalization, and we need to actually figure out how to reverse that process so that this is not possible, and we need to democratize this decision making.
Thanks, Kevin. Also, remembering from your last presentation how you were showing how many of these pension funds have actually become active in lobbying for the kind of privatization processes. So they're actually become active in trying to create more of these assets that they can invest in. I see Francisca's hand is up, so I'm going to turn it back to Francisca, and then I think that we're going to have to close on the comments.
Gracias, Devlin. Solamente para complementar.
Thanks, Devlin. Just to add, this is also a key topic, this cultural battle that Anna was mentioning as well. The pensioners, the people contributing to the pension system, don't have any real control over what is happening with their money. There's no real ownership. In that sense, the proposal that the Coordinadora of No More AFP has together with Fundación Sol is also looking at, and is also looking for new proposals for a kind of collective investment. And it's also interesting to see how that doesn't contribute to financialization, for example, putting down energy standards. So today, at the moment in Chile, large companies receive money from the pension funds, and they have used anti-trade union practices. They've had different conflicts with the workers. So we have to look at how to advance to have this kind of security base for the future, but also taking into account ethical, environmental, democratic elements. And it would also be very interesting here. We're seeing the arguments arise over free trade agreements, how these also go against many human rights for the investment from foreign funds. And that was really everything I wanted to mention. I just also wanted to say thank you so much for inviting us to participate in this space. And the Chilean state has to subsidize many of the pensions because the whole system is so broken that it doesn't offer enough pensions to the pensioners. For us, this is a system of individual uncertainty, not a system of social security. And it's important to mention that point as well. So thank you again. And I've enjoyed this seminar very much. Thank you. Thank you, Francisca.
For 1 minute. Peter, you're on mute. Can you have
1 minute.
Yeah, sorry.
To answer a couple of, or to try to answer a couple of things that have been raised here. Is the problem pension funds or is the problem agribusiness? we don't have the time, but the essence of what is called financialization is that you cannot distinguish between purely financial actors and so-called non-financial corporations. And I think that's an important point to realize, because those non-financial corporations have become financialized and vice versa. The question raised in the exchange between Ewan raised by Ewan. I think the only solution at the most general level is to think in terms not of democratizing governance of private pension funds, but of delinking what is in fact the eminently public function of providing support for people in their old age, of delinking that from financial markets. That is the only solution, because otherwise there was no way to stop an endless procession of investment money seeking returns that inevitably becomes predatory. So yes, the answer is to protect land, water, healthcare, education, many other things that traditionally have been thought of as public goods from private investors, and to keep them under public control. The solution is not divestment. The solution is not enhanced governance. The solution is a very different system. And I think just to answer one other point that was raised, if it weren't a Canadian pension fund investing in a particular project, then a sovereign wealth fund would intervene. So there are no lack of actors in financial markets. The goal has to be to protect public goods from private profit-seeking investors of any sort, whether they be pension funds, whether they be sovereign wealth funds, what have you. You know, and so I think, if you remember this old Via Campesina slogan, WTO kills farmers. Well, we've just heard that other things kill farmers. Pension funds kill farmers. Sovereign wealth funds kill farmers. Banks kill farmers. Farmers kill farmers. You need to bring together all these points of resistance to start working towards systemic solutions. And again, I think this has been a very welcome space to at least raise those questions.
Thanks so much, Peter. Those are great words to end on. We're really at the end of our time here. And you know, this is such a big, complex issue, but it's a really necessary one. And we do have to find ways to provide solidarity with those who are suffering from the activities of pension funds. And we have to find ways to ensure that workers can retire with security and dignity. I want to emphasize that this webinar has been recorded, so you will be able to follow it. You can turn to the GRAIN website, and please do reach out. You have my personal my staff email address there, devlin@grain.org. We really want to hear from you. We want to know what work you're doing. We look forward to collaborations. And like I said, our intention was to have a follow-up meeting from this, where we can get more into this discussion about strategy, find ways that we can work collectively, find ways that we can support each other. So please do get in touch with us, and let's work towards that next meeting. Also, I do want to thank the audience for your participation today. I want to thank the panelists and the reactors for the amazing wisdom that was shared. And I want to thank the interpreters who did a great job. I listened in occasionally and saw that it was an excellent interpretation today. Very difficult topic, but thank you very much. And also the team at A Growing Culture who have worked with us to organize these webinars. You've been fantastic, and there's no way we would have been able to pull this off without you. So I think that's it. Please, you can go to the landing page for more information and resources. And again, let's consider this a starting point, and we look forward to working with you in the days, weeks, and months ahead. Thank you very much for your time today.